Good morning. As we begin, a couple of things. I want to let you know how grateful I am to have been part of this community for this weekend. I want to thank Pastors Naomi and Jason and Liz. They have been just wonderful hosts. I want to thank Amy Carr, who really was instrumental in bringing me here. So the thanks or blame can go to her, whichever you'd like. And is Sandy still? Sandy, gave that presentation. It's beautiful that you're acknowledging pastors that you appreciate. I guess I'm a pastor you don't appreciate. Anyway, love your enemies, bless those who curse you. Okay. So it's great to be with you. And in school, they always used to take attendance before class. They would call out our names and we'd say, here, right? And my last name begins with a P, which meant I had to pay attention much longer than the people whose last names began with a B. And I was always jealous of them. But I'm rather new here, so I need to take attendance today. So if you're here, just let me know, okay? Lovers of humanity. Here. Okay, good. Exhausted activists. Here. Bleeding heart liberals. Here. Rabble rousers. Here. People pressured to be here by a partner or a spouse. Helpers. Here. Healers. Here. Caregivers. Here. Good troublemakers. Here. Bigger table builders. Here. You are present and accounted for. I'm glad that you're here today. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Everyone thinks forgiveness is a lovely idea until they have something to forgive." Well, I'm here to tell you that everyone loves the bigger table until the table's expansion pushes into our areas of comfort or rattles our places of privilege or asks us to welcome those we just as soon keep at a distance. It's the same reason we find it much easier to love the least of these than to love our enemies. It's the same reason it's easy to love our neighbor if we like our neighbor. Now, I wrote a book. It's called The Bigger Table. And that book was written to create spiritual community, redemptive community, where disparate people could gather and be seen and heard and loved and respected. It's an idea that I found in the life and teachings of Jesus, but it's something I believe fully in. And I wrote that book in 2015. Yeah. See, then we had a 2016. And some things happened in our country. We don't have to get into the details. But we began to walk a journey together. And I began to find something out about myself. I started to realize I might not want as big a table as I thought. Because now there seemed to be people that I was hesitant to welcome. There were people whose ideas were too different from my own for me to have relational proximity with them. Now, you're very decent people, so you haven't experienced any of this. I wish you could have met me when I wrote that book in 2015. I was effervescent. I was bubbly. I was hopeful. I believe I looked like a young Brad Pitt. I don't know what happened. I've been facing in recent years my own fraudulence, my own hypocrisy, my own inconsistency, because I want the table to expand, and I know that it needs to expand beyond where I am comfortable with. That's the challenge, isn't it? How do we do this Jesus love thing? How do I love the least and my enemies? How do I love the oppressed and the people who are oppressing? How do I remember the humanity of people who may be doing something that I see as inhumane? A little bit of my story. I have been a local church pastor for 27 years. I began in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, not far from here. And I was drafted into ministry. I didn't choose it, and I have loved it. And the last decade of that ministry has been spent ministering to a sprawling, disparate, virtual congregation made up of people all over the planet. Some of you may be here simply by finding me online, and I'm grateful for you stepping into a community like this. It's a courageous thing. And in this work that I do, I don't consider myself now. I travel to new places, right? And I hear hundreds of stories. I do some speaking, but I try to do a lot of listening too. And I don't consider myself at this point an author or a blogger or even a pastor primarily, but a collector of stories, a war correspondent. I step into a new town or reach a different community or find people where they are online, and I get into the trenches of life with them and I say, tell me what's happening here on the ground so that I can tell the folks back home. And when I do this, people give me proximity to their pain. They tell me their stories. They reveal to me their struggles. They share with me their grief. And I sit with them and I listen for the places their voices break. And I ask myself, what are they trying to say that they cannot quite verbalize? What do they wish people could hear if their voices could carry beyond their relational proximity? How can I connect their humanity with humanity that they have never met before and may be quite different from? And I listen to all these stories and I try to find the common narratives in all those disparate experiences. And that's the place I speak and minister and try to live from. Being aware of the fear and the grief and the sadness and the longing that is everywhere right now. So I'm going to ask a question. Elizabethtown and surrounding, friends online, what's happening here on the ground? In the life that you're living, in the places that you study and work and shop and live, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What is stirring up in you? What is twisting your insides? What is keeping you up at night? Because I want you to take all of that to these moments. This is not about someone up here with speaking down to you. This is about someone alongside you, and I want us to share this time together. Now, I hate to be the bearer of bad news because we've gotten so much goodwill together, but I pride myself on saying stuff that needs to be said, so here's some bad news for you. Pretty soon, we're not going to be here. I don't mean in this building in an hour. 100 or so years, and we're all goners, every one of us. You, me, the people we adore, the people we despise, those passing us in traffic and on our timelines, the people half a foot or half a world away. We're all hopelessly temporary. Sure, we're each doing our best to valiantly bob and weave here in the ring against gravity, but barring some serious medical breakthroughs, she is and will remain undefeated. And in a breathtaking flash, our time here will have expired and we will cease to be. And in a few decades, our names and our achievements will eventually fade from collective memory, largely swallowed up by time and by progress. Now, we can and probably should talk about the elusive mysteries and the promising possibilities of the afterlife at some time, but this life, tick-tock, friends, it's a whole lot later than you think. Now, I'm pretty sure I don't need to tell you this. While many people out there spend their lives avoiding the reality of their impending non-existence, numbing it with sensory distractions and retail therapy and TV binges, you don't do those things. The fact that you're here, though, means you aren't a stranger to existential crises, or big questions, or the examined life. or sleepless nights. You want it all to matter. You want you to matter. And because you do, I wanted to make sure you don't bury the lead today. Before you take another breath, yeah, pretty soon you're not going to be here. But you are here now. And that's fairly big news. You're present for this day, and it wasn't a guarantee that you would be. Approximately 150,000 people died since you and I went to bed last night. Lots of people who were here yesterday aren't anymore, but you are. That story should be the all caps, bold type headline in your head, but it's probably been crowded out by trending disasters on your timeline, by relational implosions you're enduring, by the length of your to-do list. It's been obscured by last-minute middle school projects and unscheduled water leaks and fender benders in the parking lot and the unexpected horror upon seeing yourself in the grocery store self-checkout camera feed. I want to look the way I look in the vanity mirror in our guest bathroom, but I think I look like I do in the CVS camera, and that depresses me. It's quite likely that most of the time you are so overwhelmed by the tasks and appointments and worries and obligations in front of you and the fatigue from carrying it all that you forget that you're firmly into your wrist right now. Press it in until you feel the blood pulsing beneath it. When you got it, say, "I got it." If you don't, let me know. We'll call authorities. Call helpers. Okay. Pause for a second and breathe. Notice the rise and fall of your chest, as shallow and rapid as it might be today. When you feel it, say, "I feel it." Be fully aware of the sights and sounds and scents around you. And when you reconfirm that you're alive, ask yourself why you live. Who or what is still worth spending yourself on behalf of? Is there still something worth fighting for? Most of us are strangers. I don't know your why. I just know that you have one. A burden you carry, a cause that grips you, a dream that you can't shake, a hill worth dying on, a face across from you in the living room. You have some nagging, defiant part of you that refuses to quit despite all experiential evidence that maybe you should. This is the reason your still being here matters, because of how much is still worth fighting for. A rapidly heating planet being swallowed up by unchecked gluttony is worth fighting for. A fractured nation teetering precariously on the edge of implosion is worth fighting for. An American church that is so often afflicted with white supremacy and so often devoid of Jesus is worth fighting for. The decades of human and civil rights rapidly evaporating around us, and the people they represent are worth fighting for. Already vulnerable people driven by their leaders to the limits of what the human heart can endure are worth fighting for. Your treasured relationships that are pushed to within inches of disintegration are worth fighting for. And as importantly as all of these things, the brave but exhausted human being staring back at you at the mirror, who easily forgets how much their presence alters this place, is worth fighting for. So much is worth the fight, and as people of the common good, as human beings of faith, morality, and conscience, we cannot willingly cede any of it. We can't let the sun set on this day without doing everything we can to save the things worth saving. Warriors for the common good? Here, here. Thanks, I'm glad you're still here. See, because despite all that feels lost and all that feels broken, we are still here. And being here comes with an invitation and a responsibility. Recently, I asked my social media followers what gives them hope right now. A myriad of reasonable and predictable replies came back. Children, grandchildren, spouses, partners, meaningful work, food, love, sex, laughter, music, and dogs. Lots of dogs. People love dogs. But there was an unsettling pattern to many of the responses, too. Despite every breakdown of our election processes and legislative safeguards and constitutional protections over the past 3 years, despite being let down by church leaders and political leaders and elected officials and federal judges, far too many people are inexplicably waiting for superheroes or saviors to fix this. 3 statements I heard a lot or similar. I have faith that God will make things right. I believe that love wins. I trust that goodness will persevere. The prevailing wisdom seems to be that love or God or someone out there are going to save the day, and I wish it were that simple. I wish it was that cheap and clean a proposition, offer up some skyward prayers or make a public floodlight appeal to the heavens and wait for our inevitable rescue. But that's not how this is going to work. It's not rational, it's not biblical, it's not possible. See, contrary to the t-shirts and memes, love will not win on its own simply because. Courageous, empathetic, outraged people armed with sacrificial love, fully participating in this life and relentlessly engaging the broken systems around them, they will win. When the disparate, sprawling army of compassionate human beings that you have been enlisted into spend themselves on behalf of other people, when they keep going despite being exhausted, when they refuse to tire of doing the right thing, when they will not be shamed into silence, then love will be winning. See, friends, love isn't some mysterious force outside of our grasp or beyond our efforts that exist disconnected from us. It's not supernatural magic, it's hard work. It's the tangible cause and effect of caring passionately about our families and neighbors and strangers and exercising that impulse in measurable ways. Love is ornamental and worthless unless it moves from aspiration to incarnation, and that's why it is so good that you are here, people of love. And many of you are people of God, and here's the good news, God is. But God is not going to magically make things right either. It's not part of the deal. In the story that Jason read before I stepped up here, it's one of the most powerful examples of what I call Jesus' table ministry that inspired this journey for me. If you had never heard it before, I want to just recap. Jesus has been preaching, and like many preachers, he's gone long. Naomi, people have been talking here. And his disciples, his students, they notice the time and they see the crowd. They say, Jesus, you've been preaching for a long time. You started on Saturday. It's now Sunday. Chick-fil-A is closed. Where will holy people eat? Now, I used to read this story as a how story, because the how story is, well, Jesus says to the disciples, well, you feed them, and then they begin to say, well, we can't, we only got this little amount, and he's kind of says, what do you have? And then the story goes that he feeds thousands of people, and I used to read that as a how story, and it used to trip me up. I'd be distracted with the mechanism of the miracle. Like, okay, how does that actually happen? But then I began to read that story as a who and a what story. And the who was Jesus, and the what was Jesus feeds people. And the why was because they were hungry. See, what's revelatory about this story is not the multitude that he feeds. It is what he doesn't do. There is no altar call. No spiritual gifts assessment test, no membership class, no moral screening, no litmus test to verify theology and identify those who voted correctly and who are worthy to be fed. their hunger, Jesus' compassion makes them worthy. Jesus feeds people, and that's what we need to be doing. And the best part about this story is what Jesus does say, because the disciples say, Jesus, hungry people, and Jesus says, they don't need to go away. You feed them. You are here. And even when they shrug their shoulders and look at the impossibility of the circumstances, he asks them to bring whatever meager provisions they can collect so that he can multiply them. So God, or Jesus, or the universe, or whatever you believe holds this place together isn't fixing this without a movement of people. We get to be co-creators with the divine. We have our presence and our proximity. We have agency, and we have the ability to feed hungry people. We who are harboring a ferocity for humanity, born out of our moral convictions and propelled by our spiritual centers, are going to need to move in order to make right all that is so terribly wrong. We're going to have to sacrifice sleep or relationships or comfort in order to step into the messy, jagged trenches of people's pain and remind them that good human beings still inhabit this place. We are the beautifully imperfect angels who get to bring the good tidings of great joy. And one more thing, we know from our friends in politics and news that thoughts and prayers alone aren't fixing this mess. What will alter the story that we find ourselves in is prayerful people who reflect fully on the fractures and malignancies and injustices in front of them and decide they will change what they can change and do what they are able to do. See, the prayer that Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord's Prayer, many of you know, Jesus doesn't pray and ask us to pray to be sent away to heaven, but to bring heaven down, to make this place resemble the most beautiful place. Heaven will come down as ordinary, finite, fragile mortals here on the ground endeavor to be the answer to as many of their prayers as possible. That's not to say that things aren't working outside of what we can see and measure and quantify, but it means we are able to do physical things. Heal and help and give and protest and volunteer and canvass and listen and vote. We have that proximity and agency. And if we do these physical things in the small, in the close, in the here, in the now, and the doable, then we will be able to rest with the mysteries, knowing we did all we could with what we were entrusted with. People of love, you are still here. See, God isn't going to ensure that all our schools are safe for LGBTQ children. Love, as an idea, isn't going to make assault weapons less available in our streets. Jesus isn't going to, on his own, secure our elections and ensure everyone has a voice in a vote. Love isn't going to legislate protections for the planet and the poor and the marginalized. God isn't going to magically dismantle the systemic racism still afflicting our nation. Jesus isn't going to loudly push back against anti-immigrant bigotry when it shows up in our neighborhoods and news feeds and holiday gatherings. You and I are, whether we are compelled by love or God or simply an acute sickness in our stomachs that will not let us rest. Human beings fighting for the common good will do these things, and that's why I'm glad you're here, and it's why I hope you're here. I have a lot of uncertainty about these days, like you do. But here's what I know. I know that Jesus was about more than getting people's ticket punched to heaven. Because if that were all Jesus were here to do, the Gospels would be much shorter, as I said on Friday. It'd be a nice little altar call, and that would be it. But we see Jesus living alongside people, being where the bigger table is, where people are stretched, where there is expansion, where there is conflict and turbulence, because that is where we are invited to. There is beauty at the bigger table. There is love. There is learning. There is hope. But there is turbulence. Jesus invited disciples to experience life along with him. Why? So that someone here could replicate his heart and live as he lived. See, theology is embodied or it's useless. Jesus said, "Take my yoke and learn from me." He said, "I've washed your feet. I've given you an example to replicate." Jesus said, "These people are hungry. You give them something to eat." He says, "Love one another the way I've loved you." He says, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I've overcome the world." And this is the invitation Jesus offers to those who would follow him in the ways of compassion and mercy and love and justice. It is a ministry of presence and movement, a beautiful act of being with people and emulating him. I shared on Friday a story about two teenagers who were at one of our youth gatherings, and they were standing in the back of the room, and the short version is they didn't want to be there, and I went up and tried to make them feel welcome, asked them some questions, did my best to do my pastor thing, and they were having none of it. And then a couple days later, I got a letter from one of the students, the older of the two, and she said, my brother and I were at this event. You probably don't remember us, but I just wanted to let you know, we didn't want to be there. We were being forced to be there. And I said, "That's what you want as a minister, people under compulsion, under duress?" And she said, "But we had a really bad experience at our former church, especially with our youth pastor." And she said, "But you seemed different." She said, "You seemed to really care." And she said, "You made me feel visible, and I rarely feel visible." And friends, this is why it's important that you're here. You get to be the seers. You get to let people know that you feel their presence. I know what I want to do right now. I want to quit some days. Don't you? Want to pack it in. Stop caring, find another place to call home, maybe move to a bluer state or maybe a kinder nation. And if I can't do that, I at least want to turn off the news and be oblivious to the losses and the overreach and the regression like so many people I know who don't seem the least affected by everything happening right now. I also know that I can't do any of those things. Because if I do, I know the same people who seem to be celebrating the rollback of rights or the regressions right now will have an even easier time bending the arc of the moral universe away from justice. I know hatred will be emboldened. There will be fewer barriers between vulnerable people and those seeking to make them more vulnerable. And because of that reality, there is always something worth fighting for. Persistent fighters for the worth of every human being. Hear, hear. Today I'm going to ask you to be irrational. Irrationality and spirituality are often tethered together. They don't tell you that. We can admit it. Hopelessness is probably the most rational response right now. Looking at everything that's happening, it seems to make sense. But we can't choose hopelessness because that would mean we concede not only the recent past, but the present and the future as well. Falling into permanent despair or apathy would be giving away not merely the last few years, but today and tomorrow too. It would mean allowing those motivated by fear and exclusion to win the battle uncontested. And most importantly, hopelessness seeds the narrative within our heads to those who do not deserve that gift. Hope right now is a bit irrational, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong choice. It's always the right choice because it's the only one that keeps us moving forward. In 1942, Jewish Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and philosopher Viktor Frankl was sent to a German prison camp where he would be for 3 years while losing his father, mother, brother, and wife. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, based on his experience in a prolonged period where everything was out of his control and the prospects were extremely dire. When life should have felt pointless. And he writes, everything can be taken from a human being but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And we choose our own way when we wake up and step into the world and are faced with challenges and questions and crises and heartbreak and tragedy. And we decide whether circumstances will determine our internal condition or whether we will. Whether the trending news will dominate the headlines in our heads or whether we will write a different story. Frankl says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Between stimulus and response is our choice, and you are still here. The present, like the one we inhabit today, it's the one you encounter these very words in. It's always the space between stimulus and response. And in this space, we have one thing, friends. The choices we make based on what we believe matters. We don't receive guarantees of success or promises or health or assurances of safety. All we have is the small, close, and the here, and the now, and the doable. In my work as a collector of stories, there's a pattern to the things people share with me. Vulnerable, oppressed, hurting people never say, John, could you be less bold? Could you be less loud? Could you be less confrontational? They say, why are so many good people so silent right now? Why is the only expression of Christianity something predatory and exclusionary and hateful and cruel? And you get to be the response to them, not me. There's always something to lose and always something we can save. Elizabethtown needs people who are alive and who still believe diversity is worth fighting for. It needs people who will step into people's stories and make them feel visible. Because this community, all of us individually and collectively, can be a sanctuary for people battered by circumstances and cruelty. So today, instead of looking to the sky and waiting for a pastor or a politician or some invisible force to come in and dramatically beat back the darkness, you wield the brilliant light in your possession. Maybe you're the hero you've been waiting for. Maybe you're the answer to the urgent prayers. Maybe hope is not in the sky. Maybe it's in the mirror. Yeah, the less than ideal news is that pretty soon you'll be gone. God is here. And the beautiful news is that people of fierce, abiding, scandalous love, you are still here. You are still here. You are still here. Thank God. Amen.